Chapter 1. The chains in the dark. The catacombs beneath the old cathedral smelled of earth and forgotten prayers. Eleanor Ashwood had come seeking silence, not salvation, though perhaps the two were closer than she'd thought. The stone steps descended into cold darkness, away from the city that had stripped her bare, away from the courtroom where her name had been dragged through mud and glass. Thief, liar, accomplice. None of it true. All of it believed. She pressed deeper into the tunnels, her single candle casting trembling shadows on walls that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. The air grew thicker, older. She should turn back. She knew that. But turning back meant facing the whispers, the closed doors, the small apartment that still smelled like betrayal. Her ex-fiancé had been the embezzler. She had merely trusted him. Apparently, that was crime enough. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber, and Eleanor stopped so abruptly her candle nearly guttered out. In the center of the space, illuminated by some sourceless pale light, hung a man. No, not hung. Chained. Silver chains. She realized with a strange clarity, wrapped around his wrists and throat, suspending him inches above the stone floor in a grotesque parody of crucifixion. His head hung forward, dark hair obscuring his face. His clothes were old-fashioned, a shirt that might have been white once. Dark trousers, boots that had seen better centuries. He was either dead or dying, and Eleanor's first coherent thought was that she should run. Her second thought was that no one deserved to die like this. Alone in the dark, she moved closer, her practical nurse's training overriding her fear. The chains had left burns on his skin. Not ordinary burns, but marks that looked almost ritualistic, as though the metal itself were poisoned. His breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. "Can you hear me?" Her voice echoed strangely in the chamber. His head lifted slowly, and Eleanor's breath caught. His face was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. Sharp angles and aristocratic lines, skin too pale, lips bloodless. But it was his eyes that froze her in place. They were dark, nearly black, and ancient in a way that made her 26 years feel like infancy. Run. The word was barely a whisper, rough with disuse. Please. Eleanor had spent 3 months being told what to do, where she couldn't go, who would no longer associate with her. Some contrary part of her soul had calcified under that pressure, turned stubborn and immovable. "I'm a nurse," she said, which wasn't technically true anymore. They'd revoked her license pending investigation, but close enough. "Let me help you." "You can't." His eyes closed, as though the effort of looking at her was too much. "The chains are silver-blessed, vampire-wrought. They'll burn you too." The word vampire should have sent her running. Instead, Eleanor found herself studying the chains more closely. They weren't locked with a mechanism, but bound with something else. Symbols carved into each link, glowing faintly with a sickly green light. "Who did this to you?" "House Moreau." The words came with something like a sigh. "I broke their sacred law. This is the price." "What law?" "I refuse to feed on an unwilling human." His lips twisted into something too bitter to be a smile. "Consent matters, apparently, except when it doesn't." Eleanor's hand hovered over the chains. "If I remove these, will you hurt me?" His eyes opened again, meeting hers with an intensity that felt physical. "I haven't fed in 6 days. I'm too weak to hurt anyone. But when House Moreau discovers you've freed me..." He trailed off. "They'll make what they did to you in that courtroom look like mercy." How did he know about the courtroom? Eleanor pushed the question aside. "Are there any humans in House Moreau?" "No. They consider mortals cattle." "Then I don't think I'm particularly concerned with their opinion of mercy." Eleanor reached for the first chain. "Don't..." The metal burned, just as he'd warned. Eleanor hissed but didn't let go, her fingers finding the symbols etched into the silver. They were words, she realized, Latin or something older. A binding spell, perhaps. A curse. She'd always been good at puzzles, at finding the loose thread that unraveled everything. Her fingers found a break in the pattern, a place where one symbol didn't quite connect to the next. She pressed, twisted, and felt something give. The chain fell away from his left wrist. The vampire's eyes went wide. "How did you..." "I noticed details." Eleanor moved to the next chain, ignoring the burning in her palms. It's what made me a good nurse. It's also what made the jury think I must have known what he was doing with the hospital funds. The second chain released, then the third. When the collar around his throat finally opened and clattered to the stone floor, the vampire collapsed forward, and Eleanor barely caught him. He was heavier than he looked, solid and cold against her. "You need blood," she said quietly. "I won't take yours." His voice was stronger now, but still strained. "I've never taken from an unwilling source. That's why they chained me here, to break me, to make me so desperate I'd lose control when they finally offered me a victim." Eleanor helped him sit against the wall, her burned hands throbbing. "How long would they have left you here? Until I broke, or until I died?" He studied her face in the candlelight. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "I've been called both this week." Eleanor sank down beside him, suddenly exhausted. Though mostly foolish, they sat in silence for a moment, two outcasts in a forgotten place. Finally, the vampire spoke again. "My name is Lucian Devereux. Was a lord of House Devereux, before they fell to ruin 3 centuries ago. Now I'm nothing. No house, no protection. Just another rogue vampire that House Moreau can torment for sport." "Eleanor Ashwood," she replied. "Former nurse. Current pariah. No family left to disappoint, which is something. Why did you come down here?" Eleanor looked at her burned hands, at the silver chains scattered on the floor, at this impossible creature who should terrify her but somehow didn't. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "the only way forward is down." Lucian's laugh was unexpected, rough and genuine. "Well, Eleanor Ashwood, you've just made yourself an enemy of the most powerful vampire house in the city. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." She met his dark eyes steadily. "I've already lost everything that mattered. What else can they take?" His expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his features. "More than you know. But perhaps," he hesitated, "perhaps together we'll survive long enough to find out." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even reassurance. But it was something. A thread of possibility in the dark. Eleanor reached out and picked up one of the chains, studying the broken symbol. "Tell me about House Moreau. If I'm going to have enemies, I should at least know what I'm facing." Lucian smiled, and for the first time, she saw the flash of fangs. "That, Eleanor, will take considerably longer than one night." "Good," she said. "I've got nowhere else to be." And so, in a catacomb beneath a cathedral, a wounded woman and a starving vampire began to forge an alliance that would shake the foundations of the immortal world. Neither of them knew it yet, but fate rarely announces itself with trumpets. Sometimes it comes with chains in the dark and the stubborn kindness of a stranger. Chapter 2. Sanctuary in shadows. They couldn't stay in the catacombs. That much became clear when Lucian tried to stand and nearly collapsed again. Eleanor caught him by the arm, steadying him against the wall, and felt the tremor that ran through his frame. "When did you last feed?" she asked, keeping her voice clinical, professional. It was easier that way. To treat this as a medical problem rather than confronting the strangeness of asking a vampire about his dietary needs. 8 days ago. A willing donor from the underground network. He spoke through gritted teeth. House Moreau intercepted me on my way back. They'd been watching for weeks, waiting for me to slip. The underground network? Humans who consent to feeding in exchange for protection, money, or simply the experience. Lucian's eyes met hers. It's illegal under house law. They claim it gives rogues like me too much power. All feeding must be registered, monitored, controlled by the houses. Eleanor processed this, her mind cataloging information the way it once had with patient symptoms and treatment protocols. So they're not just punishing you for refusing to feed without consent. They're punishing you for circumventing their control. You understand politics quickly. I understand power. Eleanor's voice carried an edge she hadn't intended. I watched it destroy me from the inside of a courtroom. Different system, same principle. Lucian studied her with those unsettling dark eyes. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Screaming, running, perhaps trying to stake me with a broken chair leg. A ghost of humor touched his lips. Not practical questions and political analysis. Eleanor picked up her candle, which had somehow remained lit through everything. I stopped having predictable reactions about the time my fiancé's lawyers argued that my nursing access to hospital records made me the obvious mastermind behind his embezzlement scheme. Reality doesn't scare me anymore. It's already shown me how absurd it can be. She held out her free hand. Can you walk? We need to get you somewhere safer than this. Lucian took her hand, his fingers cold but surprisingly steady. My safe house is 2 miles north. But Eleanor, if we go there, you'll be marked as my ally. House Moreau will come for you. They'll come anyway. She helped him toward the tunnel entrance. You said they'd been watching you. They'll know I freed you. The question isn't whether I'm already marked. It's whether I face them alone or with someone who understands what they are. You're remarkably pragmatic for someone who just learned vampires exist. I'm remarkably pragmatic because I just learned vampires exist. Eleanor adjusted her grip as they navigated the narrow passage. Panic helps no one. Questions, plans, information. Those might actually keep us alive. The climb back through the catacombs was slow, punctuated by Lucian's careful breathing, and Eleanor's burning palms protesting every contact with stone walls. When they finally emerged into the cold night air behind the cathedral, she had to pause, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. The city sprawled before them, all gaslight and shadow, beautiful in the way dangerous things always were. Eleanor had lived here her entire life, but tonight it looked different, layered with secrets she'd never noticed before. How many? She asked quietly. How many vampires in the city? House Moreau controls perhaps 200. There are smaller houses, Severin, Blackthorn, Ashcroft, with 50 to 100 each. And rogues like me. Maybe a dozen at most. Lucienne leaned against the cathedral wall. The houses maintain careful balance with the human world. They control from the shadows, banks, courts, hospitals. Anywhere power concentrates. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. The hospital where I worked? Moreau Holdings. Your fiancé likely embezzled from their accounts. When you were implicated, they probably found it convenient, a ready-made scapegoat. So I was doomed from the start. Eleanor's laugh was hollow. That's almost comforting. At least it wasn't my fault. It was never your fault. Lucian's voice carried unexpected gentleness. The houses destroy what they can't control. It's their nature. They moved through back alleys Eleanor had never noticed before. Paths that wound between buildings like veins beneath skin. Lucien navigated with the ease of long familiarity, though his pace remained slow, measured. Twice, he stopped abruptly, head tilted as if listening to sounds Eleanor couldn't hear. Are they following us? She whispered. Not yet. But they will be. Moreau doesn't leave loose ends. His safe house was in the old quarter, tucked above an abandoned bookshop whose windows were dark with grime and neglect. Lucian produced a key from somewhere and led her up a narrow staircase that creaked beneath their weight. The bay apartment inside was sparse but surprisingly elegant. Old furniture that might have been expensive once. Bookshelves crammed with volumes in multiple languages. Thick curtains drawn against windows that faced east. A single oil lamp provided dim illumination when Lucian lit it. The bedroom is through there. He gestured to a door on the left. Take it. I don't sleep in beds anymore. Too human a habit. Eleanor glanced around. Where do you sleep? I don't, really. Not the way you do. Lucian sank into a worn leather chair. We call it the day death. When the sun rises, I'll simply cease. No dreams, no awareness. Just absence until darkness returns. The clinical part of Eleanor's mind filed this away with all the other impossible information she'd gathered tonight. The rest of her was beginning to feel the exhaustion creeping in, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd run too far, too fast. Your hands, Lucian said suddenly. The burns from the chains. Let me see them, Eleanor had almost forgotten. She held out her palms, revealing the angry red marks where the silver had seared her skin. They hurt, but distantly, as if her body had decided pain was a low priority tonight. Lucian took her hands gently, studying the burns with a frown. Silver-blessed wounds don't heal normally. They resist magic, resist time. You'll carry these marks. Scars don't frighten me. Eleanor met his gaze. I've earned worse. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. He released her hands carefully. There are supplies in the bathroom. Bandages, salve. The salve won't heal the burns completely, but it will ease the pain. What is it? Old vampire medicine, made from night-blooming herbs and moon water. Don't ask me to explain the chemistry. I was turned long before your modern science gave us names for such things. Eleanor moved toward the bathroom, then paused. When were you turned? 610 Paris, during the reign of Louis XIV. Lucian's smile was edged with memory. I was a nobleman's third son. No inheritance, no prospects. Charming enough to be invited to parties, but poor enough to be beneath serious consideration. When the vampire who ruled House Devereux offered me immortality, I thought I was being granted paradise. And instead, I learned that eternity is considerably longer than it sounds. And that power without purpose becomes its own kind of prison. He leaned his head back against the chair. House Devereux fell to internal conflict 30 years after my turning. I've been masterless ever since. 3.5 centuries of watching the world change while I remain frozen. Eleanor found the salve in a bathroom that was cleaner than she'd expected. All white tile and old-fashioned fixtures. The ointment smelled of lavender and something else. Something that made her think of starlight and forgotten rituals. She applied it carefully, feeling the immediate cooling relief. When she emerged, bandages wrapped around her palms, Lucian was standing by the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. They're here, he said quietly. 3 of them, moreau enforcé. They're watching the building. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. Can they get in? Not without invitation. Vampire law prevents us from entering human dwellings uninvited. But this building is abandoned, unclaimed. If they're willing to argue that it's not truly a residence. He let the implication hang. What do we do? Lucian turned to face her, and in the lamplight she could see the hunger in his eyes. Not for blood, exactly, but for something. Purpose, perhaps, or simply someone to fight beside after centuries of solitude. We prepare, he said, because tomorrow night they'll make their move. And when they do, I need you to be ready to run. I'm not running. Eleanor, I'm not running, she repeated firmly. I've been running for 3 months. From the trial, from the whispers, from my own life. I'm done. If they're coming for us, we face them together. Lucian stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. A real smile that reached his ancient eyes. You're going to get us both killed. Probably, Eleanor agreed. But at least it'll be interesting. Outside, in the shadows below, 3 vampires watched and waited. Inside, a wounded woman and a starving vampire began to plan their survival. The war between them had already begun. They just didn't know it yet. Chapter 3. Blood and boundaries. Dawn came slowly, bleeding pink and gold across the horizon. Eleanor watched it from behind the heavy curtains, her body exhausted, but her mind too wired for sleep. Somewhere in the apartment behind her, Lucian had gone still. Not asleep, he'd said, but ceased. The day death. She'd checked on him once, around 5 a.m, and found him in the chair exactly as he'd been, head tilted back, eyes closed. But there was a difference she couldn't quite name, an absence that went deeper than unconsciousness. As if his soul had temporarily vacated the premises, leaving only the shell behind. It should have terrified her. Instead, she'd felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. He was utterly vulnerable like this. Anyone could walk in and destroy him. No wonder vampires needed safe houses. Trusted spaces. Why Lucian had spent centuries as a rogue, never belonging to a house that might betray him in the daylight hours. Eleanor made coffee in the small kitchen, finding supplies that surprised her. Fresh beans, good quality, recently purchased. Evidence of the human life Lucian tried to maintain despite his nature. She wondered who shopped for him, who kept this place stocked. The underground network he'd mentioned, perhaps. The coffee was scalding and bitter, exactly what she needed. She settled at the small table with one of Lucian's books, a leather-bound journal filled with handwritten notes in French, Italian, and languages she didn't recognize. His handwriting was elegant, precise, the words of someone who'd learned to write with a quill. Most of the entries were observations. Notes on vampire politics, changes in house leadership, treaties made and broken. But scattered throughout were more personal thoughts. Watched a woman feed pigeons in the square today. She smiled at each bird as if greeting old friends. I cannot remember the last time I felt such uncomplicated joy. The city has electric lights now. The darkness isn't what it used to be. Sometimes I miss the old dark. Deeper, more honest. Modern darkness is merely shadow, illumination's temporary absence. I saw her again. The pigeon woman. She was crying on a bench alone. I wanted to ask what troubled her, but what comfort could a monster offer? I walked on. Later, I hated myself for the cowardice. Eleanor traced the words with her bandaged fingers, feeling the weight of centuries in the ink. Lucien wasn't just old. He was lonely. Profoundly, achingly alone in ways she was only beginning to understand. Around noon, someone knocked on the door. Eleanor froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. The knock came again. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and demanding. Lucien Devereux. The voice was female, cultured, with an accent Eleanor couldn't place. I know you're in there, and I know what you're hiding. Eleanor set down her cup carefully and moved to where Lucien sat motionless in his chair. His chest didn't rise or fall. His skin was cold as marble when she touched his shoulder. I won't hurt him. The voice continued through the door. I'm not Moreau. I'm here to help if you'll let me in. Vampires can't enter without invitation. Eleanor called back, proud that her voice didn't shake. True, but I'm willing to wait. You'll have to leave eventually, for food, for supplies, and when you do, we'll have a conversation you won't enjoy. Eleanor weighed her options. She could wait for nightfall, for Lucien to wake and advise her. But 8 more hours of siege mentality would drive her mad, and something in the woman's voice suggested she meant what she said. Help, not harm. Who are you? Eleanor asked. My name is Isabeau Severin. I'm the lady of House Severin, a much smaller house than Moreau, but considerably older. Lucien and I have history. What kind of history? A pause, then, the complicated kind. But I've never wished him harm, and I don't wish you harm either. The enemy of Moreau is often a friend of mine. Eleanor made a decision that was either brave or foolish. The distinction seemed meaningless lately. She opened the door. The woman on the threshold was striking, tall and slim, with pale blonde hair pulled back severely and eyes the color of winter ice. She wore a tailored coat that probably cost more than Eleanor's former monthly salary, and carried herself with the effortless authority of someone long accustomed to power. She was also, unmistakably, a vampire. May I come in? Isabeau asked, with a smile that showed no fangs but promised them. I don't know the rules about inviting vampires into other vampires' homes. The dwelling is his, but you're human. Your invitation carries weight, particularly since you're clearly his. What, guest, Allie? Isabeau's gaze sharpened with interest. Lover? None of your business. Eleanor stepped aside. You can come in, but if you try to hurt him, you'll do what? You're brave, I'll grant you that, but you're still human. Isabeau entered gracefully, her eyes immediately finding Lucien's motionless form. Something flickered across her face. Old pain, old regret. Still sleeping in chairs. Some habits never change. She circled him slowly, the way one might circle a sculpture in a gallery. Do you know what you've done, freeing him? Moreau has declared blood vendetta. They've petitioned the Council of Houses for permission to hunt you both openly. By nightfall, you'll be fair game for every vampire in the city looking to curry favor with the most powerful house. Eleanor's stomach dropped. The Council? 5 eldest houses maintaining balance. Moreau, Severin, Blackthorn, Ashcroft, and Remington. We vote on matters of law, punishment, territorial disputes. Isabeau turned to face her. Usually we deny blood vendettas. They're messy, disruptive, bad for secrecy. But Moreau is claiming you freed a dangerous rogue, that you're threatening the careful peace between vampires and humans. That's insane. I freed one chained vampire, who refused to feed on an unwilling victim, who established an underground network that challenges house authority, who represents everything the old houses fear most. A vampire who believes humans deserve autonomy, consent, respect. Isabeau's smile was thin. Lucien Devereaux is more dangerous than you realize. Not because he's violent, but because he's revolutionary. Eleanor looked at the man in the chair. Ancient, starving, alone. Revolutionary seemed like a strange word for someone so fundamentally isolated. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Because House Severin will abstain from the vote. I can't stop the vendetta, but I can refuse to participate." Isabeau produced a small vial from her coat pocket. "And I can offer you this." The liquid inside was dark red, almost black. Eleanor didn't need to ask what it was. "He'll need to feed when he wakes," Isabeau continued, "and he won't take from you. I know him well enough to be certain of that. But vampire blood can sustain another vampire in desperate circumstances. It's not ideal, not satisfying, but it will keep him alive. Why help him? You said you have history." "We do." Isabeau set the vial on the table. 200 years ago, Lucien Devereaux saved my life. He was part of House Devereaux then, before its fall. I was a newly turned vampire, hunted by my own house for the crime of being turned without permission. He gave me sanctuary, risked his house's displeasure, taught me how to survive. Her voice softened. When House Devereaux collapsed and he became a rogue, I tried to repay the debt. He refused, too proud, too convinced he'd only endanger me. And now he has no choice. Neither do you. Isabeau moved toward the door. "I'll do what I can at the council meeting tonight. But Eleanor, understand that if Moreau gets permission for the vendetta, every vampire in this city becomes your hunter. You'll need to leave, find sanctuary beyond their territory. And that means crossing into lands you can't imagine." "Where?" "North, past the city limits, into the old territories where the wild vampires roam. No houses, no laws, no civilization, just survival." Isabeau paused at the threshold. "It's not a life I'd wish on anyone, but it's the only option if you want to live." After she left, Eleanor stood alone in the quiet apartment, holding the vial of dark blood and trying to process everything she'd learned. Revolutionary, blood vendetta, wild territories. She'd thought freeing Lucien from chains was an ending. Instead, it was barely the beginning. Outside, the afternoon sun blazed indifferently. Inside, a vampire slept his death sleep, unaware that the fragile peace he'd maintained for centuries was about to shatter completely. Eleanor set the vial beside his chair and returned to her vigil at the window. When darkness fell and Lucien woke, they would have decisions to make. Terrible, irreversible decisions about survival, sacrifice, and how far they were willing to go to stay alive. But for now, in the last quiet hours before the storm, Eleanor kept watch. She'd promised to face this together. And unlike so many promises she'd heard in courtrooms and hospital corridors, she intended to keep this one, even if it killed her. Chapter 4. The Awakening. Sunset arrived with a quality of light that Eleanor had never noticed before. Gold deepening to copper, then to blood red, then finally surrendering to violet dusk. She watched it from her post by the window, exhaustion making everything feel distant and dreamlike. The moment the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, Lucien gasped. It wasn't a gentle awakening. His body jerked as though struck by lightning, his back arching, hands gripping the chair arms with enough force that she heard the wood crack. His eyes flew open, black and disoriented, pupils blown wide. Eleanor was beside him in an instant, her nurse's instincts overriding everything else. "Lucien, you're safe. You're in your apartment. It's just after sunset." He blinked several times, focusing on her face with visible effort. Awareness returned slowly, like a tide coming in. "Eleanor," his voice was rough, unused. "You stayed. Where else would I go?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "Anywhere. Everywhere. Far from me." He tried to sit up straighter and immediately swayed, one hand going to his temple. The day death is harder when you're starving. Everything takes longer to reconnect, body to mind, present to memory. Isabeau Severin was here. That got his attention. Lucien's head snapped up, suddenly completely alert despite his weakness. "Isabeau? Here? When?" "Around noon. She said she wanted to help." Eleanor reached for the vial on the table. "She left you this." Lucien stared at the dark liquid with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. longing mixed with revulsion, gratitude tangled with shame. Her blood. She said vampire blood could sustain you, that you'd need it before... Eleanor hesitated. Before the council decides on Moreau's petition for blood vendetta. She told you about that? Lucian took the vial carefully, holding it like something precious and poisonous in equal measure. Then you know what's coming. Hunters. Every vampire in the city. Eleanor sat on the arm of his chair, suddenly too tired to stand. She said we should run north to the wild territories, that it's the only way to survive. The wilds? Lucian's laugh was hollow. Isabeau always did have a dark sense of humor. The wild territories are where vampires go when they've given up on civilization entirely. No laws, no houses, no pretense of humanity. Just predators hunting in the dark. Sounds delightful. When do we leave? He looked at her sharply. You're not coming with me. We've been over this. No, Eleanor. Listen to me. Lucian set the vial down and turned to face her fully. If you come with me to the wilds, you'll be prey. Constantly. Every vampire there will smell your humanity, your warmth, your blood. I can protect you against 1 or 2, maybe even 3 if I'm at full strength. But against dozens? Against feral vampires who've forgotten what consent even means? He shook his head. You'd be dead within a week. And if I stay here, how long before Moreau finds me? Before they use me as bait to draw you out? Eleanor met his eyes steadily. At least in the wilds, I know what I'm facing. Here, the danger wears expensive suits and smiles while it destroys you. There's a third option. Lucian's voice dropped lower. I could turn you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor had wondered when this would come up. In every vampire story she'd ever read, and she'd devoured them as a teenager, back when the world seemed simpler, this was always the pivotal choice. Mortality or immortality? Humanity or power? Life or eternal existence, is that allowed? She asked. I thought you said turning required house permission. It does. Turning without permission is one of the gravest crimes in vampire law, but I'm already condemned. One more crime won't make much difference. Lucian's gaze was intense, searching. As a vampire, you'd be stronger, faster. You could defend yourself. And the blood vendetta wouldn't apply. Only humans who aid rogues are targeted. What's the catch? The catch is that you'd be vampire. He said it simply, but Eleanor heard the weight behind the words. You'd never see sunlight again. Never taste food or drink anything but blood. Never age, never die, never change. You'd be frozen exactly as you are now, for centuries. Maybe forever. Eleanor looked at her bandaged hands, thought about the life she'd lost, the future that had been stolen from her. I'm 26 years old. No family, no career, no reputation. My name is dirt in every hospital in the city. I have nothing. You have your humanity. And what has my humanity gotten me? 3 months of hell and a court case I'll never win? Eleanor stood, pacing to the window. I'm not saying I want to be a vampire, but I'm not sure I want to stay human either. If human means being helpless while powerful people destroy you for convenience. Lucian rose as well, moving to stand beside her. The hunger in his eyes was more visible now, not just for blood, but for something else. Understanding, perhaps, or companionship. If I turned you, he said quietly, you'd be bound to me. Not as a slave, I'd never do that. But the bond between maker and fledgling is profound. You'd feel my emotions, sense my presence. For the first century at least, we'd be connected in ways that would make privacy impossible. Would I be myself? Would I still think my own thoughts? Yes, you'd be you, just more. Stronger, sharper, with senses you can't imagine, but also hungrier. The thirst is constant, Eleanor. It never truly goes away, you just learn to manage it. And if you lose control, if you kill while feeding, he trailed off. Some part of your humanity dies with your victim. Every time. Eleanor processed this, trying to imagine what it would mean. An eternity of hunger, of watching the world change while she remained static, of taking blood from humans who might or might not want to give it. I need time to think, she said finally. We don't have much time. The council meets in 3 hours. Lucien picked up the vial again. I should feed. Isabeau's blood will help, but it won't fully restore me. If Moreau comes tonight, and they will, I need to be strong enough to fight. He uncorked the vial and drank in one smooth motion. Eleanor watched, fascinated despite herself. His throat worked, his eyes closing, and for a moment she saw something almost like ecstasy cross his features. Then it was gone, replaced by a grimace. "Vampire blood tastes like memories," he said, setting down the empty vial. "I can taste her fear from 200 years ago, her gratitude, her guilt at never being able to fully repay the debt. It's intimate in ways that human blood isn't." How does human blood taste? The question was out before Eleanor could stop herself. Lucian's eyes met hers, and the hunger there was no longer abstract. "Like life," he said simply, "like everything we've lost. Warmth, sunlight, joy, sorrow, all of it carried in the blood. Each person tastes different. The young taste of potential, the old taste of memories. Those who are happy taste like sunshine. Those who suffer taste like storms. What would I taste like? I don't know, and I won't find out unless you ask me to." Lucian moved toward the small closet in the corner. "We need to prepare. Weapons, supplies. If we're running tonight, we'll need—" A crash from below interrupted him. Splintering wood, breaking glass, voices shouting in a language Eleanor didn't understand. Lucian's entire body went rigid. "They're here." Moreau didn't wait for the council's permission. "How many?" 5, maybe 6. He pulled open the closet, revealing an arsenal Eleanor hadn't expected. Stakes, silver blades, something that looked like a crossbow modified for modern use. "They're coming up the stairs." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do we do?" Lucian handed her a silver blade, smaller than the others but wickedly sharp. "You run, out the back window down the fire escape. Head north toward the old church on Miller Street. There's a woman there named Sister Catherine. She knows what I am, and she'll give you sanctuary until— I'm not leaving you. Eleanor, we fight together or we die together." She gripped the blade, feeling its weight, its purpose. "I'm done running." For a moment, Lucian looked like he might argue. Then something shifted in his expression. Resignation, perhaps, or respect. Or maybe just the grim acceptance that they were out of options. "Stay behind me," he said, moving to position himself between her and the door. "Don't try to be a hero. If they get past me—" The door exploded inward, and Eleanor's world became chaos, violence, and the terrible beauty of vampires at war. Chapter 5. Blood in the Moonlight. The first vampire through the door was fast, impossibly fast. Eleanor's human eyes could barely track the movement as it lunged toward Lucien with claws extended. But Lucien was faster, even weakened by hunger. He sidestepped with fluid grace and drove a stake through the attacker's shoulder, missing the heart but immobilizing the arm. The vampire screamed, a sound that didn't belong to anything human. "Rogue." It spat, its face contorting with rage. "You think this mortal will save you? Moreau has declared you both forfeit. Your ashes will decorate the council chamber. Always so dramatic, Marcus." Lucien twisted the stake and the vampire collapsed. "Tell me, did Moreau promise you a promotion for this? Or are you still just an errand boy after 2 centuries? 2 more vampires poured through the doorway. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, blade gripped in her shaking hands, trying to stay out of the way while her mind catalogued everything with clinical detachment. 2 males, 1 female, well-dressed, coordinated, trained. The female moved with predatory elegance, circling around Lucian's right side while one of the males took the left. Classic flanking maneuver. Eleanor had seen it in nature documentaries, wolves hunting elk. "The human is mine," the female said, her voice like honey over razors. "Moreau wants her alive for questioning, but he didn't say she had to be intact." She lunged. Eleanor reacted on instinct, bringing the silver blade up in a clumsy arc. She'd never held a weapon before, never trained for combat. But 3 months of rage and fear and helplessness had built something hard inside her, something that refused to be prey anymore. The blade caught the vampire across the forearm. The reaction was immediate and violent. The vampire shrieked and recoiled, her arm smoking where the silver had cut. Black blood, thick as oil, welled from the wound. "Silver-blessed," the vampire hissed, cradling her injured arm. "The mortal has silver-blessed weapons. Someone warned them." Isabeau, Eleanor realized. The weapons in Lucian's closet weren't random. They were specifically prepared for fighting vampires. a gift from an old friend who'd anticipated this moment. Lucian used the distraction to drive the male vampire back with a series of strikes that were more dance than fight. Precise, economical, centuries of experience distilled into pure movement. But Eleanor could see the strain in his features, the way his movements were fractionally slower than they should be. Isabeau's blood had helped, but it wasn't enough. He was still starving. More crashes from below. Reinforcements coming up the stairs. They had minutes at best. The window. Lucian shouted, slamming the male vampire into the wall hard enough to crack plaster. "Eleanor, go!" But Eleanor had seen something. In the chaos of fighting, the female vampire had moved between them and the window, cutting off escape. This wasn't just an attack. It was a coordinated trap. "They're hurting us," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "The window's blocked. They want us to go deeper into the apartment." Lucian's eyes met hers, and she saw the grim understanding there, the bedroom. "There's another exit, through the closet, into the adjoining building. It's narrow, you'll have to crawl, but—" "I'm not leaving you!" "You're not leaving me. We're both going." He grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the bedroom as 3 more vampires filled the doorway. "But you go first. If they catch you in the passage, you're trapped." The bedroom was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Bed unused, curtains drawn. Lucian threw open the closet, revealing a false back panel. Behind it was darkness and the smell of old wood and dust. "It leads to the building next door, an old tenement. Exits on 3 sides. Get to street level and run north. Don't stop, don't look back." He pressed something into her hand, a small card with an address written in elegant script. "If we get separated, go here. It's neutral ground. Even Moreau won't violate sanctuary there." Eleanor looked at the card, then at Lucian. His face was drawn, his movements careful in that way that suggested he was conserving every ounce of strength. He couldn't win this fight, not against 6 or 7 vampires, not while half-starved, but he'd die trying to give her time to escape. Something crystallized in Eleanor's mind, a decision that was probably foolish, definitely dangerous, but felt more right than anything she'd done in months. "I have a better idea," she said. Before Lucian could respond, before she could second-guess herself, Eleanor brought the silver blade to her own wrist and cut, quick and shallow, just deep enough to bleed. The effect was instantaneous. Every vampire in the apartment froze. The sounds of fighting ceased. Eleanor heard their breathing shift, become deeper, more ragged. The scent of fresh human blood, she realized, was like ringing a dinner bell. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Lucian's voice was strangled, caught between horror and hunger. "Giving you what you need." She held out her bleeding wrist. "You said vampire blood tastes like memories. Let mine taste like choice, consent, everything you fought for. I can't." "You can. You will?" Eleanor's hand was remarkably steady. "Because if you don't feed, we both die. And I didn't free you from chains just to watch you starve out of principle." The vampires in the doorway were moving closer, drawn by the blood. Their eyes had gone black, pupils consuming everything else. The female was practically vibrating with restrained hunger. "Decide fast," Eleanor said. "Before they decide for you." Lucian's resistance collapsed like a dam breaking. He caught her wrist, his grip gentle despite his desperation, and pulled her close. His eyes met hers one last time, a question, a plea, an apology. Eleanor nodded. His fangs, when they pierced her skin, were cold and sharp and surprisingly painless. For a moment, there was just the strange sensation of blood leaving her body, of something essential being drawn out. Then the world exploded into sensation. She could feel Lucian, not just physically, but inside her mind, her soul, her very essence. His hunger, his gratitude, his centuries of loneliness all poured into her like water into a dry well. And beneath it all, something else. A fierce, desperate protectiveness that took her breath away. He was tasting her life. Her pain, her defiance, her choice, and she was tasting his immortality. His endless nights, his careful morality in a world without mercy. The connection was overwhelming, intimate beyond anything Eleanor had imagined. This was what vampire feeding meant, not just taking blood, but sharing souls. Lucian pulled away abruptly, his eyes wide with shock. Blood, her blood, stained his lips, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked truly alive. Color in his cheeks, strength in his posture, power radiating from every line of his body. "You taste like storms," he whispered, "like lightning and fury and unbreakable will." Then he turned to face the other vampires, and Eleanor saw why they called him dangerous. Lucien Devereaux, fed and furious, was terrifying. He moved like water, like wind, like something beyond mortal comprehension. The first vampire didn't even have time to scream before Lucian's hand punched through its chest and tore out its heart. The second tried to run and made it 3 steps before Lucian caught it, wrenched its head around with a sickening crack, and let the body fall. The female vampire backed toward the door. Her earlier confidence evaporated. "The council will hear of this. You've fed from a human, that's a violation. Of a consensual donor," Lucian corrected, his voice deadly calm. "Which is my right under the old laws. Tell your masters that Lucien Devereaux remembers what they've tried to forget. Before houses, before councils, before any of your petty politics, we had laws about consent. And I've never broken them." The remaining vampires fled, and Eleanor heard them crashing down the stairs in their haste to escape. Silence fell, broken only by her ragged breathing and Lucian's slow, measured breaths as he centered himself. "Are you all right?" He was beside her instantly, examining her wrist with careful attention. The wound had already stopped bleeding. Vampire saliva, she remembered reading once, had coagulation properties. "I didn't take too much, but you'll need food, water, rest. I'm fine." And strangely, she was. Lightheaded, yes, but also exhilarated. Alive in a way she hadn't felt in months. "Did we win?" "We survived." "That's not quite the same thing." Lucian helped her to her feet. "But yes, for tonight, we won." Eleanor looked at the bodies, the destruction, the blood on the walls. "They'll come back. They will. Which means we need to leave. Now." He retrieved the card he'd given her, studying the address. "This sanctuary, it's our only option. If they'll have us, and if they won't," Lucian's smile was grim, "then we head north to the wilds, and I teach you how to survive in a world without mercy." Eleanor shouldered her bag, gripped her silver blade, and followed Lucian toward whatever came next. Behind them, the apartment burned. Lucian had set fire to the evidence, to the bodies, to the life he'd carefully constructed over decades. Ahead lay only darkness, danger, and the terrible intimacy of the bond they'd forged in blood. But they would face it together, and somehow, that made all the difference. Chapter 6. Sanctuary's Price. The address led them to a part of the city Eleanor had never visited. Too old for tourists, too poor for gentrification, caught in that liminal space where history decayed into ruin. The buildings here leaned against each other like exhausted soldiers, their facades crumbling, their windows dark or broken. Lucian moved through the shadows with practiced ease, one hand on Eleanor's elbow to guide her around obstacles she couldn't see. The bond between them hummed faintly. She could feel his alertness, his caution, the way he catalogued every sound and scent for potential threats. "What is this place?" Eleanor whispered. Old Town. It was the city's heart 300 years ago, before the river changed course and commerce moved elsewhere. Lucian paused at a corner, listening. Now it's where the forgotten live. Humans who've fallen through society's cracks, and vampires who want nothing to do with house politics. Is that where we're going? To forgotten vampires? To something older than vampires? He turned down an alley so narrow Eleanor had to walk sideways. The sanctuary I mentioned. It's run by the Sisters of Perpetual Night, an order of nuns who've known about vampires for centuries. They offer neutral ground, asylum for those fleeing blood vendettas. Even the houses respect their authority. Why would nuns help vampires? Because they believe all souls deserve mercy, even immortal ones. Lucien's voice carried a note of something. Reverence, perhaps, or old affection. Sister Catherine is the eldest. She was already ancient when I first came to this city. I've often wondered if she's something more than human herself, but I've never had the courage to ask. The alley opened onto a small courtyard, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. In the center stood a church. Not the grand Gothic cathedral she'd fled from days ago, but something older, humbler. Stone worn smooth by centuries, stained glass windows that glowed faintly with candlelight from within, a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left, as if weary from keeping watch. Santa Maria della Notte, Lucian said quietly. Saint Mary of the Night, built in 1342 by a bishop who understood that darkness isn't always evil. They climbed the worn steps to the heavy wooden door. Before Lucian could knock, it swung open. The woman who stood in the doorway was small, bent with age, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of smiles and sorrows in equal measure. She wore the traditional black habit of her order, but her eyes, pale blue and startlingly sharp, belonged to someone much younger. Lucienne Devereux. Her voice was surprisingly strong. I wondered when you'd darken my doorstep again, though I admit I didn't expect you to bring company. Sister Catherine. Lucian bowed, an old-fashioned gesture that looked natural on him. I need sanctuary. For both of us. Of course you do. Everyone who comes here needs sanctuary. Sister Catherine's gaze shifted to Eleanor, and something in those pale eyes made Eleanor feel utterly transparent. And you, child, you're the one who freed the chained vampire, the one Moreau wants broken. How did you... News travels fast in Old Town, especially news that promises interesting times ahead. The nun stepped aside. Come in, both of you. We'll discuss the price of sanctuary over tea. The interior of the church was warm despite the autumn chill, lit by hundreds of candles that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. The pews were filled not with worshippers but with people, humans and vampires both, Eleanor realized with a start. They sat separately, eyeing each other with wary respect, but they shared the same space without violence. Neutral ground, Sister Catherine explained, noticing Eleanor's surprise. Within these walls all feuds are suspended. Feed here, and you'll face excommunication from every house in existence. Draw blood here, and you'll answer to powers older than vampire politics. She led them through a side door into a small sitting room where a fire crackled cheerfully. A tea service was already laid out, steam rising from the pot as if she'd known they were coming. Sit, Sister Catherine commanded, with the authority of someone long accustomed to being obeyed. You look half dead, child. Not you, Lucian, you always look half dead. It's part of your charm. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling. She sank into a chair that was probably older than her grandmother and accepted a cup of tea that smelled of chamomile and something else. Something that made her eyelids heavy and her racing heart slow. Mild sedative, Sister Catherine said calmly. You're running on adrenaline and stubbornness. Neither will sustain you much longer. I can't afford to sleep. Moreau knows better than to approach this church. They may be powerful, but they're not stupid. The nun poured tea for herself, ignoring Lucian's polite refusal. However, sanctuary comes with conditions. Are you prepared to hear them? Eleanor exchanged glances with Lucian. Through their bond, she felt his uncertainty, his discomfort with being in anyone's debt, but also his trust in this strange old woman. Yes, Eleanor said. We're prepared. First condition, you work. I run this sanctuary on prayers and charity, and both are in short supply. You'll help in the kitchens, tend the gardens, assist with the sick and injured who come here. In exchange, you'll have a roof, food, and protection. We can do that, Eleanor agreed. Second condition, no violence within these walls. I don't care what feuds you've brought with you, what houses hunt you, what blood debts you owe. Here, you're at peace, or you're not welcome. Understood. Sister Catherine's gaze sharpened. Third condition, you must choose. Both of you. This sanctuary is temporary, a pause, not an ending. Eventually, you'll have to decide what comes next. Will you run to the wild territories? Will you seek house protection? Will you stand and fight? I give you 1 month to make that choice. And if we can't decide, Lucian asked quietly, then I decide for you. And you won't like my decision. Sister Catherine sipped her tea. I've been doing this for a very long time, Lucian. I know when people are running from their problems, and when they're running toward solutions. Right now, you're doing both, and that's unsustainable. Eleanor felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. Everything since the trial had been reactive, fleeing one disaster, stumbling into another. She hadn't chosen anything. She'd merely survived. "There's a fourth condition," Sister Catherine continued, her tone softening slightly. "But this one is optional, and it's for you alone, Eleanor." "What is it?" "I can teach you about vampires, their history, their laws, their weaknesses and strengths. If you're going to survive in this world, whether human or vampire, you need to understand what you're facing." The nun's eyes held ancient knowledge. "But that education requires you to confront some uncomfortable truths about both species. About what humans have done to vampires, and what vampires have done to humans. It's not a pretty history." Eleanor thought of the courtroom, the false accusations, the way power had crushed her without mercy. She thought of Lucian in chains, punished for refusing to victimize the innocent. She thought of Isabeau's careful politics and Moreau's brutal authority. "I want to learn," she said firmly. "I'm tired of being ignorant." "Good." Sister Catherine stood with surprising agility. "Lucienne, there's a room in the east wing that will suit you. No windows, solid door, warded against intrusion. You'll be safe during the day death. Eleanor, you'll have the room adjacent, connecting door between them but locks on both sides. You choose whether it stays open or closed. They were being given. Privacy, autonomy, choice. It felt almost foreign after days of running and fighting. Sister Catherine led them through corridors that twisted and turned in ways that defied the church's external dimensions. Eleanor suspected magic, old magic, woven into the very stones. The kind that existed long before humans had words for such things. The rooms were exactly as described, simple but clean, with sturdy furniture and thick curtains. The connecting door between them stood open, neutral. "Rest tonight," Sister Catherine said from the doorway. "Tomorrow your education begins. And Eleanor, welcome to the world beneath the world. I hope you survive it." After she left, Eleanor and Lucian stood in awkward silence. The bond between them thrummed with unspoken questions, complicated feelings neither was ready to address. "I should let you rest," Lucian said finally. "You need sleep and I need to process what happened tonight. The feeding." Eleanor touched her wrist, now bandaged beneath her sleeve. Was it wrong? To force that choice on you? You didn't force anything. You offered and I accepted." Lucian's expression was complex. "But Eleanor, you need to understand. Feeding creates bonds. Not just the physical connection you felt, but something deeper. Some vampires and their donors develop relationships that last decades. Others become dependent, obsessed. And I've gone 3 centuries avoiding exactly that kind of entanglement. Because you don't trust yourself? Because I don't trust immortality. Everything ends eventually, except me. I've watched everyone I've ever cared for age and die while I remain unchanged. Feeding from you, bonding with you. It's the beginning of something I can't control." Eleanor met his dark eyes steadily. "Maybe that's exactly what you need. Something you can't control. Something that forces you to feel instead of just surviving." For a long moment, Lucian said nothing. Then, "You're either very wise or very foolish. I've been called both this week." His smile was unexpected, genuine and warm and heartbreakingly human. "Rest, Eleanor Ashwood. Tomorrow, Sister Catherine will teach you things that will change how you see the world, and I'll be here, whether you want me or not." "I want you here," Eleanor said quietly. "That's the one thing I'm certain of." After he retreated to his room, Eleanor lay in the narrow bed and listened to the church settling around her. Old wood creaking, candles guttering, distant prayers being whispered in languages she didn't understand. Outside, the city hunted them. House Moreau would regroup, plan, attack again. The council would debate their fate. The wild territories waited in the north, lawless and deadly. But tonight, they were safe, fed, sheltered, and strangely at peace. Eleanor touched the connecting door, left open, an invitation neither of them was quite ready to accept, and finally, mercifully, slept. Her dreams were full of blood and candlelight and the ancient weight of choices she hadn't yet made. Chapter 7. Lessons in the dark. Eleanor woke to afternoon sunlight filtering through gaps in the heavy curtains, a strange reversal of her normal schedule. but necessary now that her life orbited around a creature of the night. The connecting door to Lucien's room remained open, and she could see his motionless form in the chair by his window, draped in shadow, utterly still. The day death. She'd have to get used to these hours of solitude. These stretches where she was effectively alone despite his presence in the next room. She found clean clothes laid out on a chair, simple but well made, practical for work. Someone had been in her room while she slept, which should have alarmed her but somehow didn't. The sanctuary had its own rhythms, its own rules, and Eleanor was beginning to understand that trust was a currency here, exchanged freely or not at all. The kitchens were bustling when she arrived, following the scent of bread and cooking meat. A dozen people worked in coordinated chaos. Humans mostly, though she spotted at least one vampire helping to carry heavy sacks of flour. The vampire noticed her staring and grinned, showing no fangs. "Daywalker," he explained cheerfully. "Rare mutation. I can tolerate sunlight for a few hours, though it's not pleasant. Makes me useful for errands." He extended a flour-dusted hand. "Marcus. Not the Marcus who attacked you. Different guy, way less homicidal." Eleanor shook his hand cautiously. "How did you know about the attack?" "Honey, everyone knows. You freed the Devereaux rogue, fed him your blood, and helped him take out half a Moreau hunting party. You're practically famous in Old Town." Marcus gestured to the chaos around them. "Sister Catherine wants you peeling potatoes. Meditation through manual labor. It's her favorite method of education." Eleanor found herself assigned to a corner with a mountain of potatoes and a wickedly sharp knife. Across from her sat an elderly woman with kind eyes and gnarled hands, who introduced herself simply as Marta. "Been coming here 40 years, Marta explained, her knife moving with practiced efficiency. "Since my daughter was turned against her will and needed sanctuary from the house that did it. Sister Catherine saved both our lives." "Your daughter is a vampire?" "Was. She chose final death 20 years ago." Marta's voice was matter-of-fact, but Eleanor heard the grief beneath. "Couldn't bear the hunger anymore, the constant need. Not all vampires adapt well to immortality. Some are too gentle for it." They worked in companionable silence for a while before Sister Catherine appeared, settling beside Eleanor with her own knife and potato. "Your education begins now," the nun said without preamble. "First lesson, vampire origin. What do you think you know?" Eleanor considered. "Demons, curses, diseases. All wrong, though diseases comes closest." Sister Catherine's knife moved with surprising speed. "Vampirism is ancient, older than recorded history. Best evidence suggests it originated as a blood parasite that evolved to keep its host alive indefinitely, constantly repairing cellular damage in exchange for regular feeding. Not supernatural, just highly efficient biology. But the immortality, the strength, side effects of the parasite's preservation mechanisms. Enhanced healing requires enhanced everything else. Strength to hunt, speed to escape, senses to locate prey. The parasite doesn't care about making its host superhuman. It just wants to survive, and that means keeping the host functional." Sister Catherine set down one peeled potato and picked up another. "The sun sensitivity? The parasite breaks down under UV radiation. Silver poisoning? Silver ions disrupt the parasite's cellular repair functions. Holy water? Psychological effect only. It's just water." Eleanor absorbed this, her mental image of vampires shifting from mystical to scientific. "What about the soul? Do vampires have souls? Dangerous question. Next lesson." Sister Catherine's pale eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Vampire reproduction. How do you think it works? They bite people, transfer the infection through blood?" "Partially correct. The turning requires 3 elements. First, the vampire must drain the human nearly to death. Second, the human must drink the vampire's blood while still alive. Third, the human must die while vampire blood is in their system." Sister Catherine's tone was clinical, educational. "The death is crucial. The parasite can only fully bond with a host during those moments when the body is between life and death, when normal cellular processes have shut down, but brain death hasn't occurred. Miss that window, and the turning fails. What happens if it fails? Usually, the human dies normally. Sometimes, the human becomes something else, neither fully vampire nor fully human. We call them the broken. They're rare, unstable, and universally tragic. Marta made a sign against evil, though whether from religious habit or genuine fear, Eleanor couldn't tell. Third lesson, Sister Catherine continued, vampire law and house structure. The houses arose during the Dark Ages when vampires realized they needed organization to avoid being hunted to extinction. 5 great houses emerged, each controlling territory and vampire populations within it. They established laws. No unauthorized turnings. No public feeding. No revealing vampire existence to humans who can't be controlled or killed. That's why Lucian is hunted, Eleanor said slowly, not just because he rejected house authority, but because he threatens their control. Exactly. Lucian's underground network proved that vampires don't need houses to survive, that consent-based feeding can work, that the old laws about taking whatever you want from humans are unnecessary. Sister Catherine's expression was approving. You're quick. That will help you survive. 4th lesson, blood bonds. You've experienced one now, so you understand the intimacy involved. But there are levels. The nun held up her gnarled fingers. 1st level, single feeding like you and Lucian. Creates temporary connection, fades within weeks. 2nd level, regular feeding over months or years. Connection deepens, becomes harder to break. 3rd level, mutual feeding, vampire and human exchange blood regularly. Creates permanent bond that can last centuries. 4th level, she paused. 4th level is theoretical. Complete fusion of vampire and human consciousness through sustained mutual feeding. Some believe it would create something new. Others think it's impossible. Has anyone tried? 2 that I know of. Both ended catastrophically. One pair went mad. The other died in ways that shouldn't have been possible for vampires. Sister Catherine set down her knife. Love between vampires and humans is always complicated, Eleanor. Add blood bonds and immortality, and it becomes nearly impossible. But some still try. Eleanor's hands had stilled on her potato. Is that what you think is happening? With Lucian and me. I think you freed a lonely vampire who'd given up on connection. I think he fed from you and discovered something worth protecting. I think you're both terrified of what comes next, but too stubborn to run from it. Sister Catherine smiled. Whether that's love or something else, only time will tell. The afternoon passed in a blur of potatoes, lessons, and revelations. Sister Catherine taught her about vampire weaknesses, fire, decapitation, heart destruction, silver, and starvation. She explained house politics, blood vendettas, and the council's delicate balance of power. She described the wild territories where feral vampires roamed, following instinct rather than law. If you go north, Sister Catherine warned, you'll need to be vampire or vampire protected. Ferals can smell humanity from miles away. They'll hunt you until you're dead or one of them. And if I become vampire, then you'll be hunted for different reasons. New vampires are vulnerable, unstable, prone to feeding frenzies, easy prey for older vampires seeking to establish dominance. The nun's gaze was steady. Either path is dangerous, Eleanor, but remaining human and staying with Lucian may be most dangerous of all. Why? Because watching someone you love stay young while you age, knowing every day brings you closer to losing them while they remain unchanged. That's a special kind of torture. Sister Catherine's voice softened with old pain. I've seen it destroy people. The human grows bitter, resentful. The vampire grows desperate, controlling. Eventually, the human chooses turning just to stop the clock. And by then it's too late. The relationship is already poisoned. Eleanor thought of Lucian's 3 centuries alone. His careful distance from anything that might create attachment. He knows this. That's why he's avoided connections. Yes. But you've already created a bond he can't ignore. The question isn't whether you'll be important to each other. That's already decided. The question is what you'll do with that importance. As sunset approached, Eleanor helped prepare the evening meal. A strange affair where humans ate normal food, while vampires received bottles of donated blood, some labeled with names and dates. The underground network Lucian had mentioned, she realized, extended into this sanctuary. Volunteer donors, Marcus explained when he caught her staring. Humans who consent to blood draws in exchange for payment or protection. Sister Catherine runs the cleanest donation operation in the city, Houses hate it because it proves vampires don't need to hunt. When darkness finally fell, and Eleanor felt Lucien's presence awaken. Through their bond, a sudden spark of consciousness that made her gasp, she found herself both excited and terrified to see him. They'd shared blood. They'd fought together. They'd fled together, but they hadn't really talked about what any of it meant. Sister Catherine found her standing outside Lucien's door, hand raised to knock, frozen with uncertainty. "Final lesson for today," the nun said gently. "Communication. Neither of you is very good at it, but if you're going to survive what's coming, together or apart, you'll need to learn." Then she was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with her fear and her choice. She knocked. The door opened, and Lucien stood there looking more alive than she'd ever seen him. Color in his cheeks, strength in his posture, eyes bright with the vitality her blood had given him. "We need to talk," they said simultaneously, then laughed, awkward and human and strangely perfect. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "We really do." Chapter 8. Threads of Truth. They walked through the sanctuary gardens, a small enclosed space behind the church, where night-blooming flowers released their perfume into the darkness. Other residents gave them a wide berth, sensing the need for privacy, though Eleanor felt their curious glances like physical touches. "You've been learning," Lucien said. "Not quite a question. Sister Catherine is thorough." Eleanor trailed her fingers along a stone wall worn smooth by centuries. "She told me vampirism is a parasite, that the houses maintain control through fear and tradition. That blood bonds are," she hesitated, "complicated." "That's one word for it." Lucien stopped beside a fountain that no longer worked, its basin filled with fallen leaves. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. When I fed from you, I tasted everything. Your rage at injustice, your grief over betrayals, your absolute refusal to be a victim." His voice dropped. "And your loneliness. It matched mine so perfectly it hurt." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't know you could sense all that. Blood carries truth. It's why I've avoided feeding from anyone who matters. Too much intimacy, too much vulnerability. But you offered, and I was desperate, and..." He turned to face her fully. "I don't regret it. That terrifies me more than Moreau. More than blood vendettas. More than anything in my 3 centuries of existence. Why does it terrify you? Because caring about someone means losing them eventually. And I'm very, very tired of losing people I care about." Lucien's expression was raw, unguarded. "My maker died in the House Devereux collapse. The few friends I made over the centuries aged and died while I watched. I learned to keep distance, to care from afar, to never let anyone close enough to hurt me. Then you came along and shattered every defense I'd built." Eleanor absorbed this, feeling the truth of it through their bond. His fear, his longing, his desperate need for connection warring with his instinct for self-preservation. "I'm going to age," she said quietly. "If I stay human, I'll grow old while you remain exactly as you are." Sister Catherine was very clear about how that destroys relationships. "Yes. And if I become vampire, I'll be locked into this age, this body, this moment forever. No children, no normal life, no sunlight, just blood and darkness and immortality." "Yes." Eleanor turned to face the dead fountain, gathering her thoughts. "My fiancé made every decision for us. Where we'd live, what job I'd take, who we'd socialize with. He said it was because he loved me, because he knew what was best. I was so grateful to be chosen by someone successful that I never questioned it." Her hands clenched. Then the embezzlement came to light, and I realized he'd been making decisions about my life without my consent all along. Using my access, my credentials, my trust. I swore I'd never let anyone control me again. I'm not trying to control you, I know, but you're also not giving me the information I need to make my own choice. Eleanor faced him. "Tell me honestly, if I become vampire, what would our relationship be? Maker and fledgling? Partners? Something else?" Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Traditionally, makers control fledglings absolutely. The bond gives the maker authority over the newly turned. It's necessary because new vampires are dangerous, unstable, prone to killing sprees. They need to be controlled until they learn discipline. And you? How would you handle it? I'd give you as much autonomy as safely possible. But I won't lie, Eleanor. The first few years would be restrictive. I'd need to monitor your feeding, prevent you from drawing attention, teach you to master the hunger. Some fledglings resent that control, even when it's necessary. It can poison the relationship before it truly begins. What if I stayed human? Then we'd have decades together, maybe. Your natural lifespan. I'd watch you age, knowing every gray hair and wrinkle brought you closer to death. I'd be tempted to turn you without permission, just to stop the clock. And you'd resent your aging, resent my eternal youth, resent the inequality. His voice roughened. There's no good option, Eleanor. Every path leads to pain. What if we had years, not decades? Eleanor's question was quiet but firm. What if I stayed human, and we accepted that our time is limited? Used it fully, without trying to make it last forever? Lucian stared at her. You'd choose mortality, knowing what's waiting in the dark? I've already chosen mortality once. I didn't take my own life when everything fell apart, even though I considered it. I chose to keep living, to keep fighting. Maybe that's what I'm meant to do. Live humanly, completely, for however long I have. Eleanor moved closer. The problem isn't that our time would be limited, Lucian. It's that we'd waste it worrying about the ending instead of embracing the middle. You'd die. I'd continue. That's not romantic, it's tragedy. All mortal love is tragedy eventually. People age, sick, and die, but they love anyway. Because the alternative is loneliness. Eleanor reached for his hand, feeling how cold his skin was against hers. You've been lonely for 300 years because you're afraid of temporary happiness. But temporary is all humans ever get, and we've built entire civilizations on it. Lucian's fingers closed around hers. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying and probably foolish. Eleanor smiled despite the ache in her chest. But I'm tired of making decisions based on fear. I freed you because it was right, not because it was safe. I fed you because you needed it, not because I'd calculated all the consequences. Maybe that's who I am now, someone who acts on conviction rather than caution. That will get you killed. Probably. But at least I'll die having lived, instead of dying having hidden. They stood in the garden, hands clasped, while the night deepened around them. Through their bond, Eleanor felt Lucian's emotions churning. Fear and hope and desperate longing all tangled together. I don't know how to do this, he finally admitted. How to care about someone without trying to protect them from everything, including mortality itself. You learn. We both learn. Eleanor squeezed his hand. One day at a time, one choice at a time. No promises about forever, just commitment to now. And when Moreau comes, when the council decides our fate, when we have to choose between the wilds and surrender, we face it together. As partners, not as maker and fledgling or protector and protected. As two people who've chosen each other despite knowing it's complicated and dangerous and probably doomed. Lucian pulled her closer, and Eleanor felt the unnatural steadiness of his form. No heartbeat, no breath, just stillness wrapped around ancient consciousness. Yet somehow pressed against him in the darkness, she felt more alive than she had in months. 1 month, he said quietly. That's what Sister Catherine gave us. 1 month to decide what comes next. Then let's not waste it. He tilted her chin up, his dark eyes searching hers. If I kiss you, it changes everything. The bond will deepen, the connection will strengthen. We won't be able to go back to being strangers who happen to help each other. Good, Eleanor said. I don't want to go back. His kiss was cool and careful, as if he feared she might break. Eleanor pressed closer, threading her fingers through his hair, refusing to be treated as fragile. She'd survived a trial, freed a chained vampire, fought house enforcers, and fed a starving immortal her own blood. She was many things, but fragile wasn't one of them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, though only Eleanor actually needed to breathe, Lucian rested his forehead against hers. You're going to break my heart, he whispered. Probably, Eleanor agreed. But you're going to break mine too eventually. That's what happens when people care about each other. They hurt each other, and they forgive, and they keep choosing each other anyway. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's better than loneliness. They stood together in the garden, while the sanctuary hummed with life around them. Humans and vampires coexisting in temporary peace. All of them fleeing something. All of them seeking something. All of them trying to survive one more night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The council's decision. Moreau's next move. The impossible choice between flight and fight. But tonight, in this moment, Eleanor and Lucian had chosen each other. And for now, that was enough. Sister Catherine watched from a high window, her ancient eyes seeing patterns that would take decades to fully manifest. She'd witnessed this dance before, mortal and immortal, circling each other, trying to find a way to love across the unbridgeable gap of mortality. Most ended in tragedy. Some ended in transformation. A rare few ended in something new entirely. She didn't know which path these two would walk, but she would give them the month she'd promised, and she would teach Eleanor everything she needed to survive, whether human or vampire, whether with Lucian or without him, because the storm was coming. House Moreau would not forgive this challenge to their authority. The council would not ignore this disruption. To their careful balance, war was inevitable. The only question was whether Eleanor and Lucian would face it together, or whether their connection would shatter under the pressure before the real battle even began. Chapter 9, The Council's Judgment. The summons arrived on their 5th night in Sanctuary. Vampire Eleanor didn't recognize appeared. In the church courtyard at midnight, ancient enough that she could feel the weight of his years pressing against her awareness like a physical thing. He wore formal attire from another century, and carried himself with the rigid dignity of a courtier. Lucien Devereux and Eleanor Ashwood, he announced in a voice that carried without shouting. You are summoned to appear before the Council of 5 Houses. Tomorrow at sunset, the Grand Hall beneath the old Opera House. Failure to appear will be taken as admission of guilt and warrant immediate execution. Sister Catherine emerged from the shadows. On what charges? For Devereux, rogue activity, unauthorized feeding network, violation of house sovereignty. For Ashwood, interference in house justice, conspiracy with a condemned vampire, assault on house enforcers. The messenger's expression was neutral, but Eleanor caught a flicker of something. Pity, perhaps, or respect. The council has voted 4-1 in favor of formal trial. Testimony will be heard, evidence presented, judgment rendered, and who voted against? Lucian asked quietly. House Severin abstained, as Lady Isabeau promised. But the other 4 houses voted for trial. The messenger produced 2 sealed letters, handing one to each of them. Your formal summons. Sister Catherine will ensure your safe passage to the Grand Hall and back, should you survive judgment. That is the extent of council courtesy. After he left, Eleanor opened her letter with trembling hands. The calligraphy was exquisite, the parchment heavy with age and authority. Eleanor Ashwood, mortal, is hereby summoned to account for crimes against House Moreau and the established order of vampire law. Testimony will be heard. Evidence will be examined. Judgment will be final and without appeal. Prepare your defense or prepare your soul. It was signed by all 5 house leaders, their seals pressed into blood-red wax. This is a trap, Lucian said, studying his own summons. They'll give us the appearance of justice while ensuring the outcome is predetermined. Moreau wants us dead, and the other houses won't risk offending them to save a rogue and a human. Then why go? Eleanor asked. Because refusing means immediate execution without trial. At least this way we have a chance. His expression was grim. A small chance, but better than none. Sister Catherine gestured them inside. Then you'll need preparation. The Grand Hall operates under ancient protocols. Knowing them might save your lives. They spent the day, Lucian's day-death hours passing in Eleanor's anxious study, learning the rules of vampire trials. Sister Catherine proved an invaluable teacher, having witnessed dozens of council judgments over her long years. First rule: the accused may speak in their own defense, but interrupting council members means immediate contempt charges. Second rule: evidence must be presented formally. No surprise revelations, no dramatic accusations. Third rule: the council votes by consensus when possible, by majority when necessary. 4 votes condemn, 3 votes acquit, ties defer judgment for 1 lunar cycle. What are our chances? Eleanor asked, honestly. Poor. Moreau controls 2 other houses through debt and favors. Blackthorn and Ashcroft will vote however Moreau demands. Remington usually follows power, which means they'll side with Moreau unless given compelling reason not to. Severin is your only potential ally, and Isabeau already risked herself by abstaining from the vendetta vote. Lucien paced the small room they'd been given, his movements restless. We need leverage, something that makes killing us more costly than letting us live. What do you have that the houses want? Sister Catherine asked pointedly. Nothing. I'm a rogue with no territory, no wealth, no political power. Then perhaps you need to find something they fear instead of something they want. Eleanor thought of everything she'd learned over the past week. Vampire biology, house politics, the careful balance that kept vampire society secret from the human world. What if we threatened exposure? If we die, information about vampires goes public? They'd kill everyone you've ever known to prevent that. Exposure is the one crime that unites all houses. They'd hunt down every human who might have heard vampire secrets. Sister Catherine shook her head. No, leverage requires something more subtle, something that divides the houses against each other rather than uniting them against you. The underground network, Lucien said suddenly. Not threatening it, offering to expand it. Moreau hates it because it challenges their control, but the other houses might see opportunity. What if we proposed making the consent-based feeding network official, regulated by the council instead of forbidden by it? Sister Catherine's eyes glinted with interest. That's clever. It gives the houses a way to benefit from what you've built, while appearing to punish you for building it without permission. Face-saving politics. Would it work? Eleanor asked. Possibly. If you present it correctly. If you make them see profit in your survival. The nun studied them both. But understand, if the council accepts this arrangement, you'll be bound to them. No longer a rogue, Lucien. You'd become a council asset, obligated to serve their interests. Better than being Ash, Lucien muttered. They spent the remaining hours crafting their argument, anticipating objections, preparing responses. Sister Catherine played the role of hostile council member, attacking every weak point in their logic until Eleanor felt wrung out, and Lucien's usual composure had cracked into visible frustration. When sunset finally arrived, Eleanor dressed in the formal clothes Sister Catherine provided, simple but elegant, designed to show respect without submission. Lucien wore clothing from his own era, updated just enough to avoid seeming archaic. Dark coat, crisp shirt, boots polished to military precision. You look like a lord again, Eleanor observed. I was a lord once, 3 centuries ago, for exactly 30 years before my house fell. His smile was sharp. Time to remember how nobility postures. Sister Catherine led them through Old Town's twisted streets to the old opera house. A building Eleanor had passed 100 times without knowing what lay beneath. The entrance to the Vampire Grand Hall was hidden in the abandoned basement, behind a door that looked like it led to storage, but actually opened onto stairs descending far deeper than any basement should go. The Grand Hall was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting vampire history in blood-red thread, 5 thrones arranged in a semicircle facing an open space where the accused would stand. Hundreds of vampires filled the tiered seating, all of vampire society come to witness judgment. The 5 house leaders sat their thrones with the ease of long practice. Eleanor recognized Isabeau Severin looking pale and grim. The others were strangers. Lord Moreau, cruel-faced and satisfied. Lady Blackthorn, beautiful and cold. Lord Ashcroft, ancient and calculating. Lord Remington, young-seeming but with eyes that held centuries. Lucien Devereux and Eleanor Ashwood. Lord Moreau's voice rang out. You stand accused of crimes against vampire law and house authority. How do you plead? Lucien stepped forward, every inch the nobleman despite his rogue status. I plead guilty to operating a consent-based feeding network. I plead innocent to all other charges. And you, mortal. Lord Moreau's attention shifted to Eleanor, and she felt the weight of his power like a hand around her throat. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to stand straight despite her fear. I plead guilty to freeing Lucien Devereux from unjust imprisonment. I plead innocent to everything else. A murmur ran through the assembled vampires. Apparently, confessing to anything was unexpected. Unjust? Lord Moreau's voice turned silky with menace. You question House Moreau's right to dispense justice? I question any justice that punishes conscience, Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Lucien Devereux was chained for refusing to violate an unwilling human. If that's a crime worthy of torture, then your justice is worth questioning. The murmur became a roar. Lord Moreau rose from his throne, his face contorted with rage. You dare— Enough! Lord Remington's voice cut through the chaos. He was younger looking than the others, with auburn hair and sharp green eyes. The mortal speaks within her rights. Let her finish. Eleanor shot him a grateful glance. We're not here to challenge House authority. We're here to propose an alternative that serves everyone's interests. And then, with Lucien beside her, they laid out their proposal. The regulated feeding network, overseen by the council. Consent-based feeding that would reduce the risk of exposure, satisfy vampire needs, and provide income for willing human donors. A system that would strengthen house control, while appearing to honor the very principles Lucien had been punished for promoting. It was politics at its finest, giving the powerful what they wanted while pretending it had been their idea all along. The council deliberated and whispered. Conversations Eleanor couldn't hear. Isabeau looked cautiously hopeful. Lords Blackthorne and Ashcroft looked calculating. Lord Remington looked intrigued. And Lord Moreau looked absolutely furious at having his revenge stolen by bureaucracy. Finally, Lord Remington stood. The council will vote. All in favor of accepting the proposal and binding Lucien Devereux to council service in exchange for clemency. 3 hands rose. Remington, Severin, and surprisingly, Ashcroft. All opposed? 2 hands. Moreau and Blackthorne. Eleanor felt her knees weaken with relief. 3 votes. They'd won. The proposal is accepted, Lord Remington announced. Lucien Devereux, you are hereby bound to council service. Your feeding network becomes council property. Eleanor Ashwood, you are granted clemency in recognition of your unique contribution to resolving this matter. Both of you are free to leave this hall alive. Lord Moreau stood abruptly. This isn't over, Devereux. You may have bought yourself time, but you're still mine to break eventually. I look forward to your attempts, Lucien replied coolly. As they left the grand hall with Sister Catherine, Eleanor realized they hadn't won freedom. They'd merely traded one form of bondage for another, but they were alive, together, and they'd bought themselves time. For now, that would have to be enough. Chapter 10, A Choice Made in Blood. The sanctuary felt different after the trial. No longer a temporary refuge, but a place suspended between endings and beginnings. Eleanor and Lucien had 3 weeks remaining of their promised month. 3 weeks to decide what came next now that they were bound to council service, rather than running for their lives. 3 weeks to determine if what they'd built in darkness could survive in the light. Eleanor woke on the 7th night, after the trial, to find Lucien standing by her window, silhouetted against the city lights. Through their bond, she felt his turmoil, guilt and relief, and something deeper, darker. Regret, perhaps, for a future they'd never have. You're thinking too loudly, she murmured, sitting up. He turned, his expression haunted. I've bound you to vampire politics. Everything we did to survive has created new chains, prettier than the silver ones, but chains nonetheless. We chose this together. You chose it because I gave you impossible alternatives. Lucien moved to sit at the foot of her bed, careful to maintain distance. Stay human and watch our time run out, or become vampire and lose your humanity. Some choice. Eleanor pulled her knees to her chest. There's a third option we haven't discussed. What? I could leave. Walk away from all of this. From the council. From vampire politics. From you. She said it gently, testing the words. Sister Catherine would help me disappear. New city, new identity, away from houses and blood bonds and impossible decisions. Lucien's hands clenched. Is that what you want? No, but I need to know it's possible. That I'm staying because I choose to, not because I'm trapped. Eleanor met his eyes. You've spent 3 centuries avoiding attachment to preserve your freedom. I need to know I still have mine. You do. You always have. His voice was rough. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll make sure you're protected, that no house touches you, that you're free to live whatever life you choose. even if it breaks your heart. Especially then. I won't be another person who controls you through love. Lucian looked away. I've watched enough humans over the centuries to know that true love requires the freedom to leave. Anything else is just possession wearing romance's mask. Eleanor felt the truth of it through their bond, his absolute commitment to her autonomy, even at the cost of his own happiness. It was perhaps the most selfless thing anyone had ever offered her. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly. His head snapped toward her. "Eleanor, I'm not leaving," she repeated firmly. "But I needed to know I could. That we're together because we choose each other every day, not because circumstances trapped us." She shifted closer. "Now ask me the question you've been avoiding for 2 weeks." Lucian was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want to be turned?" "I don't know. Some days yes, some days no. It depends on whether I'm thinking about growing old while you stay young, or thinking about centuries of drinking blood and never seeing sunlight again." Eleanor reached for his hand. "What do you want?" "I want you to be happy, whether that's for 50 human years or 500 vampire ones." His fingers intertwined with hers. "But I won't lie. The thought of turning you terrifies me. Not because of the bond or the responsibility, but because I might lose you anyway. The Eleanor who chose freedom, who refused to be controlled, who freed a chained vampire because it was right. That person might not survive becoming what I am. You don't know that. I know that vampirism changes people. Some become more themselves, their core traits magnified and clarified. Others lose themselves entirely, becoming creatures of pure hunger and instinct." Lucian's grip tightened. "And I know that if I turned you and you became someone you hated, someone you didn't recognize, I'd never forgive myself." Eleanor processed this, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her like a shroud. "How long do I have to decide?" "Years, theoretically. Decades if you're healthy. But practically?" He hesitated. "The bond we've created will make watching you age excruciating for both of us. I'll be tempted to turn you without permission, just to stop the clock. You'll be tempted to demand it, just to end the inequality. Most vampire-human relationships break within 5 years because the strain becomes unbearable. What if we had a deadline? Not decades from now when we're desperate and compromised, but soon, while we're still clear-headed enough to make the choice rationally. What kind of deadline? Eleanor thought of everything she'd learned, everything she'd experienced. The trial, the violence, the impossible beauty of vampire society and its brutal politics. End of the month. When Sister Catherine's grace period expires, I'll decide then whether to be turned or to leave. Leave? Lucian's voice cracked. I thought you said, if I stay human, I leave vampire society entirely. No council service, no blood bonds, no political entanglements. I disappear into normal human life. And you let me go. Eleanor forced herself to continue, despite the pain radiating through their bond. Because you're right. Staying human and staying with you will destroy us both. Either I become vampire and we face that together, or I leave and we both move on. That's not fair to you. You're putting all the sacrifice on yourself. No, I'm making a choice before circumstances force one. Before age or accident or violence takes the decision out of my hands. Eleanor cupped his face, feeling the unnatural coolness of his skin. If I become vampire, I want it to be because I'm choosing that life. Immortality, blood, darkness, you. Not because I'm afraid of losing you or growing old or being vulnerable. Lucian leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. And if you decide to leave? Then we'll have these 3 weeks. Fully, completely, without holding back. And we'll part with gratitude instead of resentment. Her voice wavered. It will hurt. God, it will hurt. But it will hurt cleanly, without the slow poison of watching our time run out while pretending everything's fine. They sat in silence, the weight of her ultimatum hanging between them. Outside, the sanctuary hummed with its usual nighttime activity, humans and vampires coexisting in their fragile peace, all of them fleeing something, seeking something, trying to survive one more night. Finally, Lucian spoke. 3 weeks, and then you decide. We decide, Eleanor corrected. If you think turning me would destroy what we have, tell me. If you'd rather I leave than stay human, tell me. This is both our futures. Fair enough. He opened his eyes, and Eleanor saw centuries of loneliness there. Centuries of careful distance and preserved isolation, though I suspect I'll want whatever you want, because I'm far too gone to be objective. Then it's good one of us is still thinking clearly. His laugh was bitter. You think you're thinking clearly? Eleanor, you've been in this world for 2 weeks. Everything is still new, still intense, still heightened by crisis and survival. How can you possibly make a rational decision about immortality when you barely understand what it means? I can't. But I can make an informed decision, which is better than most humans get when they're turned. Eleanor pulled him closer until their foreheads touched. Teach me. Show me what immortality really means. Not the romance or the danger, but the everyday reality of being vampire. Let me see what I'd be choosing. That could convince you against it. Or for it. Either way, I'll know. Lucian was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. 3 weeks of truth. No romanticizing, no sugarcoating. I'll show you what this existence really is. The hunger, the isolation, the endless nights and the constant need. And then you'll decide. And you? Eleanor asked. What will you decide? Whether I can bear to turn you, or whether I love you enough to let you go? His voice was barely a whisper. I won't know until the moment comes. They spent the rest of that night talking. Really talking, without the urgency of survival or the distraction of danger. Eleanor learned about Lucian's human life, the third son who'd had nothing until a vampire offered him everything. She learned about his maker, who'd died in the House Devereaux collapse, and the loneliness that had defined his centuries since. He learned about her nursing career, the satisfaction of helping others, the betrayal that had cost her everything. He learned about the person she'd been before the trial and the person she was becoming after it. As dawn approached and Lucian prepared for the day death, Eleanor felt the bond between them deepen, no longer just blood and survival, but genuine understanding. 3 weeks, she said as he settled into his chair. 3 weeks, he agreed. And then we face whatever comes next. Together or apart, human or vampire, bound or free. Eleanor watched him slip into the day death, his consciousness fading like a candle flame extinguished. Then she lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine her future. In one version, she walked away from everything, returned to some semblance of normal human life, aged and died without ever seeing Lucian again. The thought made her chest ache, but it was possible, survivable. In another version, she let Lucian pierce her throat with his fangs, drained her blood, fed her his, and died, truly died, before waking as something else. Something stronger, faster, hungrier. Something immortal. Both paths terrified her. Both paths called to her, and she had 3 weeks to choose which fear she'd face, which call she'd answer. 3 weeks to decide whether love was worth the cost of immortality, or whether freedom was worth the cost of walking away. Outside, the sun rose over a city that had no idea vampires walked its streets. Inside the sanctuary, a mortal woman contemplated becoming a monster, while an immortal monster hoped she'd choose to stay human. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. But then, love had always been the greatest irony of all, terrifying and necessary, destructive and healing, the thing that both saved you and destroyed you in equal measure. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to sleep. In 3 weeks, she'd have her answer. She hoped she'd survive the choosing.